Hello, my name is Matthew Hunter with Legacy Wilderness Academy, and I'm on a mission to document every edible and medicinal plant in the southeastern U.S. so Southerners can have greater access to nutritious food and free medicine. In today's video, we're going to be looking at one of the most important plants in the whole country for working with acute and chronic lung issues, including things like bronchitis, pneumonia, whooping cough, and even COVID-19. It's called pleurisy root or butterflyweed. In this video, I'm going to show you how to identify butterflyweed. We're going to talk about its medicinal uses. Then I'm going to harvest some, take it home, and show you how to prepare it into a medicine. Stay tuned. Before we get started, I'll quickly mention that if you want to learn more about medicinal plants of the southeastern U.S., make sure that after this video you download my free guide to medicinal plants, which you can find in the link in the description below this video. First, let's take a look at how to identify butterflyweed. This plant is actually a species of milkweed. It's also known as butterfly milkweed, or in the world of herbal medicine, it's known as pleurisy root. And scientifically, it's known as Asclepias tuberosa. And that genus name, Asclepias or Asclepias, is named after the Greek god of medicine and healing. That's where the genus name comes from. And the specific epithet tuberosa is a reference to this species' large tuberous roots. So this species is first identified by its orange flowers, which, like other milkweeds, have 5 recurved or downward facing petals, and then a 5-parted crown-like corona that points upward. Depending on your exact area, flowers for this species will start appearing around mid-May and peak in June or around July. That's the typical pattern for this species, but it will depend slightly on where you live. There are numerous species of milkweed in the United States, and not all of them are used the same way, so we need to make sure that we have the right one. There are at least 2 other species I know of that have orange flowers, so I'm going to show you 3 more characteristics that you can look for to know that you have Asclepias tuberosa, the butterflyweed. First, milkweeds are well known for their milky white sap that's visible when any part of the plant is broken. Butterflyweed is unique in that when it's broken, it doesn't have milky white sap. So if you break a leaf and look at the base where it was broken, you won't see any white sap coming out. Secondly, most milkweeds have leaves that are arranged oppositely along the stem, meaning that they come out at the same place along the stem. Again, butterflyweed is an outlier because it's one of the few milkweed species that has alternate leaves, meaning that the leaves alternate up the stem, so they sort of have a tiered pattern. They don't come out at the same place along the stem usually. Sometimes you will see some opposite leaves thrown in, but for the most part, this is a plant with alternate leaf arrangement. Lastly, this species of milkweed has distinctly hairy leaves and stems, so that's just one more feature that you can look for. So if you can put together all 4 features, orange flowers, clear sap, no milky sap, mostly alternate leaves and stems that have hairs all over them, you have indeed found yourself an Asclepias tuberosa. So the butterflyweed or pleurisy root grows throughout the eastern half of the United States and also has scattered populations randomly sort of dotted throughout the southwest mountains, specifically in the Four Corners states. It likes to grow oftentimes in open areas, so think like a prairie type of habitat, open meadows, roadsides. It likes full sun or nearly full sun and well-drained sandy or rocky soil. Next, let's talk about this plant's medicinal uses. So it is called pleurisy root. Well, what is pleurisy? Pleurisy is an inflammation or irritation of the pleura, which is the lining of the lungs. And that's how this plant was used historically, sort of as a broad spectrum herb for supporting the fluid balance and health of the lungs. For that action, it's virtually unparalleled in Western herbalism. It is an excellent plant for working with lung issues of many different kinds. It's not directly antibacterial, but it essentially makes the lungs an inhospitable place for bacteria to thrive. So it can be used for acute and chronic lung issues such as bronchitis, pneumonia, whooping cough, and even respiratory viral infections like COVID-19. It acts as a powerful expectorant. That's one of the things that it does, which means that it helps clear phlegm and mucus out of the lungs. It helps the body to expectorate it or expel that mucus. The herbalist Corey Pine Shane describes this plant's almost paradoxical abilities to help with both dry, painful lung infections, as well as helping to work with an excess of fluid buildup in the lungs. So pleurisy root stimulates secretions in the lungs. In the case of a dry situation where there's a lot of thick, thready mucus that's just stuck in there and won't come out. It helps bring moisture into the lining of the lungs, reducing pain and inflammation and loosening up that mucus, allowing the body to be able to expel it. And it also helps in the case of a pneumonia, for example, where there's too much fluid in the lungs. It's going to help with both. So it's going to be really a broad spectrum herb that can be used in many different formulas for the lungs. This plant can also help with more chronic or long-standing issues of the lungs, such as asthma, for example. Now, it's not going to help treat the root causes of asthma, which of course are oftentimes autoimmune, but it can help work with the symptoms for people who are trying to use their inhaler less. Maybe they're having a day where, it's not too bad, but it's kind of mild symptoms. Maybe there's a lot of dust in the air and they're feeling like their asthma is starting to trigger a little bit. Pleurisy root is definitely one of those herbs to reach for to help work with the symptoms and other types of chronic lung issues as well. Almost any type of lung issue will benefit from adding, pleurisy root into a formula. So it's oftentimes used not just by itself, but in formulas with other herbs specific to the situation. For example, in asthma, you may want to, add it to other herbs to help support the lungs, bronchodilators, things like that, and of course things to help with the root cause of the asthma itself. In the case of acute infection, we may want to add other herbs that are more directly antiviral, antibacterial, and also other herbs that help support the lungs, things like mullein, or some of the other herbs that we've even looked at on this channel. So, in talking about pleurisy root, the late Appalachian herbalist Tommy Bass once said that if Adam and Eve had medicine, they used it because it's one of the most useful plants we know of. I also want to briefly mention that this plant has a mild stimulating action on the heart and is often used as a heart medicine. So I've never used the plant that way, so I can't speak toward it, but I'm not worried about, the average person using this plant who doesn't have any type of heart problems and is generally healthy. But you do need to be aware if you are taking some sort of heart medication that this would be a plant that you probably want to avoid or use only under expert guidance. Next, we're going to harvest the roots. And we want to keep in mind when we're harvesting butterfly weed, it is going to kill the plant. That's important because milkweeds are the larval host for monarch butterflies, which means monarch butterflies lay their eggs on milkweed plants and the caterpillars eat the leaves. I've actually seen 2 monarch caterpillars on this patch of butterfly weed since I started filming this video, so that's pretty cool. But because milkweeds are an essential part of the monarch life cycle, every time we take one from the wild, we're essentially destroying monarch habitat. Certainly not something I want to promote as a nature and outdoors instructor. That being said, I do believe we should have a hands-on approach to conservation. I think it's important to teach, especially private landowners, about butterfly milkweed. I find that many people don't know what this is. They're quick to mow over it or spray herbicides on it, not even thinking twice. And so I do believe we can both keep these harvesting traditions alive, teaching people how to harvest medicine from their local area and heal their bodies naturally, while also preserving and stewarding monarch populations. I don't see those two things as mutually exclusive. So there are a few things you can do to make sure that your harvesting activities aren't damaging nature. One of the things you can do is grow the plant at home, or you can also buy the roots from commercial growers rather than harvesting it from the wild. But for those who do want to harvest it from the wild, you can make sure that you're only harvesting it from places where it's locally abundant. You can also make sure that you're only taking a very small percentage from each patch. So you take 1 or 2 from here, 1 or 2 from another patch, so on and so forth. And then the third thing you can do is you can make sure you're not harvesting from the same patch multiple years in a row. Being a long-lived perennial, butterfly weed has a multi-year life cycle, and oftentimes those long-lived perennials they'll have a relatively slow reproductive rate, which means it probably won't be able to keep up with your harvesting activities if you're taking it from the same patch year after year. So you want to take it from a patch and then give it like a multi-year break and look for it somewhere else. So with all those things in mind, we're going to go ahead and harvest some, and hopefully, the people watching this have a love for nature like I do and don't want to see it destroyed, but want to see it managed properly. I'm going to be harvesting a smaller plant for this demonstration. I also harvested a couple small ones the other day from this area, and I will now be ceasing my harvesting activities after this one here, leaving the population alone. This one only has 4 stems coming out of it. Some of the other ones in this area have upwards of 20 stems, which indicates that it's a much larger plant and much larger root system. I don't want to mess with those plants because, you know, those are going to put out the most amount of flowers, the most amount of seeds, and have the largest potential for monarchs to use them. Now, with any plant where we're harvesting the roots, here you see the flowers here. If we're harvesting the root, we don't usually want to harvest it when it's actually flowering, because all of the energy is going to be in reproduction in the top part of the plant. The root is not going to be as strong. So we usually want to harvest the root pre-flowering, or in the case of a perennial plant like this, it's going to have a multi-year growth cycle. We want to wait until after flowering when all the energy goes back down into the root. But for the sake of this demonstration, we'll harvest it mid-flowering, and it's still going to be a good medicinal product for us. And lastly, I do not want to damage these stems while I'm harvesting this, and I'll show you why when I'm finished. And so for this, what I want to do is dig right next to the plant. I don't want to come up to the base of the plant and start trying to dig it, because it does have a deep root system. So the way that I harvest it is I dig a deep, narrow hole right next to the plant first. And as always, I want to make a neat pile right next to the hole so that I can easily refill it with dirt. I don't want to leave a big visual impact that people are going to see. And I also don't want to have holes around that people could, you know, trip and break their ankle in. So now that we've dug a deep hole right next to the plant, I'm now going to put my shovel on the opposite side of the plant, right up on it. Not too close, I don't want to damage any roots, but you know, about, let's say, 6 inches away. And I'm going to put it as far down as I can. Now I can go ahead and take the base of the plant, again, trying not to damage these stalks. I'm going to use them for something, and start shaking away the dirt. The reason I was careful not to damage these stems is because I'm going to attempt to propagate this plant by stem cutting. Now, I want to make it very clear that, you know, propagation is not my area of expertise. So I'm not trying to really instruct you in anything, but I'm just going to show you what I'm attempting to do. The butterfly milkweed is one that is mostly propagated by seed. There's not a whole lot of information on it being propagated by stem cutting. So I don't know how successful this is going to be. It could fail, but I was able to find at least a few accounts of it being propagated by stem cutting. And there was one study that was actually done showing that it could be done. So I know that it's possible. I just don't know what the success rate will be. But let me go ahead and show you how I'm going to go about doing this. I'm going to be cutting 4 to 6 inch sections of this stem. And you know, if you're an expert on propagation or you have experience propagating this by cutting, please leave a comment and I will even pin it to the top where everyone else can read it. But I'm going to be cutting right below one of these leaf nodes at an angle. Then I'm going to be going up 4 to 6 inches and cutting right below another one. Then I'm going to strip these leaves off and leave 2 leaves at the top. And then what I'll also be doing is I'll be cutting these leaves in half. And I've just watched videos on how to do this online. The reason you cut them in half is because you want the leaf to be able to photosynthesize to stimulate root production, but you don't want the leaf, it doesn't need to be a full-size leaf. The bigger the leaf is, the more water that it's going to be losing. Because it doesn't have roots to support itself and to really soak up water, we don't want it you know, needing a lot of water. So now this is going to go under in the soil. This is a 50-50 mix of peat and perlite. So it's what some people recommend for cutting. And of course, you know, don't listen to me on the exact amounts on all this stuff, but that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to show you what I'm doing. So this is going to go in the ground, making sure that some of the leaf nodes are below the surface. Okay, so I've went ahead and rinsed off the root, and now I'm going to go ahead and chop it up into little pieces to facilitate drying. I'm just going to be putting the chopped up root on my table for a couple days, letting it dry out. You can absolutely use the plants fresh, but I've shown how to do that on this channel multiple times at this point. So now I want to show you how you can make what's called a percolation tincture. It's a more advanced form of medicine making that allows us to bypass the normally 4 to 6 week long process of making a tincture and make it into a process where you can actually be finished with it within just a few hours. And so to do that, you do have to have a dried plant. And I'm assuming that some of the people watching this will want to order the herb online and you'll get it in a dried form. So I'm going to show you one way that you can turn that into a medicine that's convenient to take and shelf stable. Okay, here's some dried roots I have from a couple plants I harvested the other day. And the first thing I'm going to do with any dried plant tincture is grind these up into a powder using a coffee grinder. All right, so here is our finished pleurisy root powder. And with a percolation tincture, you really want to make sure that it's a fine powder. It's not necessary to powder it that much with a regular dry plant tincture. And it's also important to have a kitchen scale. Now at this point, I realize, many of you won't want to make a percolation tincture because it is advanced and it also requires a little bit of extra equipment. So I want to briefly talk about just a regular dry plant tincture that we would typically make. Here I have a couple dried plant tinctures, and anytime you open up a herbal medicine book and you look at how to make a tincture, there's going to be a couple numbers you're looking at. The first is a ratio, so 1:4 or 1:5 is the standard ratio for a dried plant tincture, and that is the ratio of herbs to alcohol by weight, okay? So what that means is for every gram of herb, you're going to put either 4 or 5 grams of your alcohol into the tincture. Then you're going to put that into a jar and you're going to let it sit for 4 to 6 weeks. The second number is a percentage. That's the percentage of alcohol that you're using. Different herbs will oftentimes call for different percentages, but that's a little advanced. I tend to stick to the standard most of the time, which is, for at least that I learned, is about 50% alcohol for a dry plant tincture. Again, with percentages, don't get stuck on it. Vodka, like a 40% will work all the way up to, a 70%. And so that's pretty much how you would do it. These are probably not the correct ratio. With my dried plant tinctures, I just kind of eyeball it from experience. I don't weigh it out. But for percolation tinctures, I do weigh it out because I want to be very precise. And so let's go ahead and jump into the percolation tincture process now that you have a little rundown on your typical dry plant tinctures. Okay, so the first thing I need to do for my perk tincture is turn on the scale and get a weight for my herb. So I'm going to put this on the scale first and zero it out. And then I'll go ahead and weigh my herb. And as you can see here, it's an even 40 grams. And what that means, oh, it just went up to 41. But what that means is that I'll need 120 grams of my alcohol. But I want the final product to be 120 grams. And if I pour 120 grams in right now, a lot of it's going to get absorbed. And so to make up for that absorption, I'm going to go ahead and soak the herb right now before I start the percolation tincture so that it's fully saturated with alcohol whenever I begin the process. So I'll go ahead and put it back into this bowl. I'm going to go ahead and put just enough in here to moisten it. Okay, and throughout the process, I'll be using a little chopstick to stir it around. Shout out to Sam Kaufman. That's actually where I learned this method from. Great herbal instructor of our day for sure. But yeah, so this is fully saturated now, and to do this properly, we would really want to wait about an hour. Just really let it sit and soak it all in. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step of the process though. And so the next step is we need to weigh out our alcohol. So actually, if you have measuring cups with precise milliliter amounts, you don't even have to weigh it because 1 milliliter of water actually weighs 1 gram. Okay, so technically alcohol is a little bit lighter, but we won't worry about that for now. So what we need is 160 milliliters. Now earlier I probably confused you because the math wasn't mathing. I didn't go to college, but yes, I did go to school. We had 40 grams of the dried herb, and we're doing a 1:4, so we multiply that by 4, and we get 160. I said 120, my mistake. And so we need 160 grams of our alcohol. So I'm actually kind of curious to see how much this weighs, but I said we'd weigh it, so let's go ahead and weigh it out. See if I can zero this out. All right. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so because the alcohol is a little bit lighter than water, it actually only weighs 130 grams instead of 160. At this point, we're talking nickels and dimes here. So I'll go ahead and add a little bit more water just because I know some of you will want me to make it even. So we'll do 160. Actually, I'm adding alcohol, not water. I'm adding 70% alcohol. There we go. Hopefully I haven't lost like 99% of people, but there we go, 161 grams. We will go ahead and call that good. Let's get to the next step of our percolation tincture. So for this next step, you need some type of funnel, which is why I sort of described how to make a normal dried plant tincture before we started. I figure, most of you will not have this. You're probably weird if you do. So there are videos actually online on YouTube that you can find showing you how to cut a glass bottle in half using things you might have around your home. So yeah, I know it's a little advanced, but stay tuned because this is a cool method. It takes what is normally a 4 to 6 week process and turns it into something you can do in an afternoon. And that's really awesome if you are sick and you have an herb and you want to make a tincture with it. Of course, you can always make a tea or whatever, but it's just cool. It's cool to know. So stay tuned. So with this coffee filter, we're going to actually make a sort of a little, it's going to go inside here like a little filter funnel. And the way we're going to do that is by flattening this out and folding it in half. Then we're going to fold this into thirds. All right, now we're going to cut this about this far up. I don't know, whatever that is, 1.5 inches or something. There we go. And then we're going to open this up in the middle. And to make this easier to work with, we're going to get it wet. And then we're going to take our little baby spoon and we're going to fill it up with our herb. Next, we're going to use our chopstick to make sure there are no pockets. We're going to pretty much tamp it down. You don't want it to be super, super tight because then the alcohol won't be able to flow freely through it. But you do not want it to have any gaps or spaces. We want the alcohol to be able to move through the herb at an even and consistent rate. Next, we're going to take our funnel, put it on its side, then we're going to take this and push it down into the neck of the funnel. And now I want to create a seal. So I want to carefully, it's actually in there perfectly right now, but I want all of the wet coffee filter to be stuck up against the sides of this so that when I pour alcohol through all the herb, none of it can go off to the side. I want it to go through the herb out to the bottom of the tip, which you can see in there. It's like a little tip. So this is actually I put it in there and it's pretty much perfect. It usually takes a little messing with it to kind of get it in the exact spot you want it. And now we're going to take the rest of the herb and go ahead and put it in there. And now here we want to take our chopstick and spend time making sure that there are no little gaps in there. Also, being careful not to push this down. We don't want to create a little gap because we just spent time making it perfect. So you're going to do this gently, going all the way around and making sure that it's all packed tightly in there. Not super tight, again, but just that it's all uniform. Okay, so it's not completely perfect, but it's about as good as it's going to get. The last step was to flatten down the top with a spoon. We don't want there to be a bunch of lumps on the surface where the alcohol can penetrate one area more than another. We want it to all be flat and even. And for that very reason, we're going to go ahead and tear off a piece of the coffee filter and put it down before we pour the alcohol in, because even as we pour it in, it will disturb the surface here and it'll make some of the pieces float. And well, let me just go ahead and show you. Okay, we'll go ahead and put a little piece in here just to prevent it from disturbing that flat surface. Then we'll go ahead and take our alcohol and we'll pour it in slowly. And it looks like we're going to have to pour half of it in now and then wait for the water or the alcohol level to go down. Pour the other half in. So once it's poured in, then you can remove that piece. So the drip rate that we want to see coming off of the tip of that little coffee filter funnel is about 1 drop every 3 to 5 seconds. If you've packed it the right way and with certain types of herbs, you may not even have to worry about it. It's going to be just fine. And it will be a little bit fast when you first put it in, and then it'll slow down after the first 5 minutes or so. But if you have a certain herb that is wanting to move through the alcohol too quickly, you can take your little cap here and you can put it on, and this is going to create I don't even know how to explain it in the proper terms, but it changes like the pressure or suction, and it makes it go through much more slowly. So you can actually open it up and it will change the pressure. Actually, without the cap, it looks like it was wanting to run down the sides, but now that I have the cap on, and if I loosen it just a little bit more, we'll see now it's wanting to run down the sides. I don't know if you can see that. But if I tighten it, actually, let me see if I can show that. That liquid moves right back up, and then it starts dripping where it's supposed to be dripping there at the tip. We want it to be dripping at the tip because that means that the alcohol is all going through and getting to the right place. It's covering all of the herb. So we'll go ahead and let this sit for a few hours or however long it takes. It usually takes about a few hours, and then I'll show you what we're left with. All right, so here's how much we got. You can see the color of the tincture there. And by the way, doing this does not sacrifice the strength of the tincture. This is going to be just as strong, if not stronger, than your typical dry plant tincture. You can also see that we didn't quite get as much as we put in, and that's why I was saying whenever you moisten the herb, you want to wait a good hour, let it all absorb, and make sure that it's fully saturated before you pour in your pre-measured amount of alcohol. That way, the herb doesn't absorb more than it's supposed to, which it did in this case. Absorb at least some amount there. So now we're going to go ahead and bottle it up, and we'll briefly talk about dosage. So just like with any herb that you're using for the first time, you want to only do a few drops just to make sure that you're not going to have like a bad reaction to it or something like that. Once you get comfortable using the plant, you can take about a dropper full or 30 to 40 drops and put it in a small glass of water. I always put it in a glass of water to sort of dilute that alcohol taste, and then you can go from there. You can go past, 1 dropper full if you would like to, but like I said, this plant is oftentimes used in formulas, not all by itself. It does have some, mild toxicity, and when I say that, I don't mean like it's poisonous, it's going to poison you necessarily from these medicinal amounts that I'm showing you, but it's one that, after 3 or 4 weeks, you want to give your body a break. If you are using it for more, chronic, long-standing issues of the lungs, you want to switch it out in a formula. You don't want to, use it for too long. Give your body a break, and then after a month or so, you can come back to it. If you do take too much, you may experience some nausea, so just be on the lookout for that, and that's how you know you need to, tone it back a little bit. And lastly, this is not an herb for pregnancy. I was reading that it does have a potential for some uterine stimulation. So any herb that, does that, we don't want to use it during pregnancy. Besides that, I think that's about it. I've got some more dried root right here. Man, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I know this was a long video and really technical if you're new to tinctures especially, but even if you're just new to medicine making, this was a lot. But if you want to see more videos like this, me documenting the edible and medicinal species of the southeastern US and oftentimes, the greater eastern United States, then keep following, keep watching. I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thank you and have a great day.